Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aya Om podcast. Thank you all for sharing your breath and your energy with me. This is a conversation episode, and today I have on my good friend Steff Ting, who is an intuitive healer and also works with the family constellation system. I had the pleasure of having a session with her, and I've known her for a little while now, so I'm really happy to have her on the podcast. So we'll get an introduction from her and a little bit more about what she does, because it's not just intuitive healing and family constellations. So let's take it away, Steff.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. My name is Stephanie, and I am an intuitive guide, and I work with ancestral healing through family constellations and provide support to others through other modalities such as yoga, meditation, sound therapy, and energy healing.
Beautiful. So for those of us who don't know too much about family constellations, let's start there with a little introduction to the practice and why you love it.
Yeah, so Family Constellations was founded by Bert Hellinger in the 1990s, where he went to Africa and he lived with Zulu tribes, and he noticed that during his time there was a different way of healing in a group by accessing the morphic field that contains a lot of information, such as the memory from the family systems. And it's a modality that has helped me and those that I help uncover hidden dynamics that could be unfolding in someone's life.
And can I pause you there and ask what your explanation of the morphic field is?
So the morphic field is the energy field. Some call it the collective field of consciousness that anyone can tap into through meditation and through stillness. And it's a really deep listening of what is in the unseen realms.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I like to ask about it. And all traditions have like a different name for it, right? Like in Qigong, we study it as something different. Other spiritual traditions will have different names for it. So I just wanted to stop there.
Right.
And then in this practice,
right,
can you share a little bit more about like how it works?
Right. So I would say like one of the findings or the way to explain the morphic field could also be, when you're looking at birds in the sky, and all of a sudden there's 50 crows that appear and they all take flight together. And somehow magically they don't actually end up running into each other. They just have this intelligence intuitively that there's another being in this space. And so they will coordinate accordingly based on the flight that they're taking through their different senses other than just logic or sight. So that's another way of looking at it if you want. And it also is a field of energy that it's a cohesive field of energy that you can tap into that weaves people together.
So if I'm not mistaken, Rupert Sheldrake did a lot of work on morphic fields. Is this the same
Correct.
kind
That's
of?
correct.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a lot of interesting ones. I don't know if it was through Rupert Sheldrake, but they talked a lot about these species-specific ones because there's different levels of the morphic field. And there was one where you could teach, they did with pigeons and they did various skills with mice. And you could teach a mouse, something somewhere in a laboratory, and then all other mice would have an increased capacity to learn that skill or to tap into that knowledge.
Correct.
Kind of similar as well to the 100-meter dash or whatever it was, when no one could break it for the longest time, and then somebody did back in 1990s, and then everyone started breaking it.
Right.
So it's a collective field.
Exactly.
Really cool.
Exactly. And that field actually, when it's been shown that when you come together in a group setting, say all you need is 2 people, but when you have 10 people in a group together, that's what makes, meditation, that much more powerful than just being one person meditating. When you come in a group and you have the collective intention of healing together, you have a more potent access to the morphic field that then contains a lot of soul imprints, ancestral imprints, and we all play a part in that, and we all hold keys to each other's healings and evolution.
And then how does one tap into the morphic field? So it's not just like a concept they're reading about. What's the experience or the tools, techniques, etc.?
I think it's different for every person, the way that they get into the morphic field. So my personal experience has been doing a lot of meditation and deep listening with my inner ear. So everyone has like their ear, but within the ear, there's also the inner ear that you can bring your awareness to. And in that stillness, you can do like a deep listening from that place. Another practice would be to listen with the heart. So doing a lot of heart opening exercises, and other modalities also help with that, such as doing cacao ceremonies, working with the deep medicine of cacao, and the mudras that open up the heart. And I'm sure that you have probably a lot of breathwork exercises and qigong practices as well that help tap into the heart. And so it's really sinking deep into the heart and looking through the eyes of your heart and seeing what is unseen, essentially, in the physical realm that is with us.
Beautiful. One of the ways that I kind of conceptualize or work with the intuitive fields or the morphic fields, how I want to speak to them, it's like it's not the five senses that are picking up this information, nor is it the logical, linear, and sequential mind, the left brain mind or left brain dominant. So there's usually a process of tapping into the more intuitive capacities we have. And then just for listeners out there, it's like in my Qigong program, they talk about different levels we have intuitive perception. And one is kinesthetic intuitive perception. So these are things that your subconscious is taking in, because your subconscious mind can take in more than your five senses and is organizing and assimilating so much information from all the radio waves, ultraviolet waves, all the things that are not in our perception, but it's taking them in, and that's influencing the body mind. So we often get certain sensations and other things moving through the system. So that's one, is kinesthetic. And some people are more dominant in one of these or the other, but you can learn them all potentially. I'm more kinesthetic dominantly. And then there's empathetic, which is more like the heart sensing. And that's our intuitive field. And sometimes that's like, you know, we have an increased capacity to be intuitive for those we love and we're really connected with. And you may have experienced that. I remember when my elder passed last year, I started crying on the beach out of nowhere, and I had no idea why. And then when they told me the news, I was like, yeah, okay. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I felt that. And then the other is our higher sensitivities, and these are the clairvoyance, clairaudience, and the higher brain faculties. And those can be, once again, developed, and we're all dominant in one or the other. So it's learning to listen to those, and it does take a practice, and there's so many to get beyond our logical mind. Sometimes just like making up words like blah, 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 will get you out of there. Sometimes it's dancing, sometimes it's meditation. There's so many ways for us to tap into things beyond the thinking mind. Sorry, I wanted to give a little segue into that. So we're working with the morphic field in the ancestral work that you're doing. And then can you share a little bit more from that starting point?
So there's different ways of working with family constellations. We call them constellations because when you look in the star, like up in the sky on in a dark night, you can see the constellations of stars that magically decide where to, adjust themselves in the sky, and they're always together, whether it's, Cancer or Sagittarius up in the sky. It's a very similar concept here. So that's why it's called constellations. So there's different ways that you can work with this modality. The first one is you can do an individual constellation where you can bring different representatives through objects that would represent your different parts. So for example, if you're having pain in your heart, you could have like a stone that would represent your heart, and then you would sit with it and see what other feelings are coming up for me, what other thoughts are happening for me, and what memories is bringing up. And then from there, you can sort of do a self-constellation with yourself. So very common for the individual constellation, self-constellation, we do a lot of work with the heart, and also inner child healing as well plays a big part in that. The other one that we work with is called family constellations in a group setting. So we bring about 10 to 15 people together, either online or in person. And in that group, we have one person who is the seeker that has an issue that is present in their life. So for example, it could be, I don't feel good enough in my life and I'd like to shift that. In that setting, we would have people in that group start to represent different aspects of the person. Mm-hmm. So it could be that we would bring someone in as their mother, a grandmother, so on and so forth. And then we would let the morphic field inform us of what needs to happen next. And there are different movements that do happen within a constellation that gives us clues. So for example, if a representative that is playing a part in the constellation is looking at a spot on the floor, that is usually representative of someone that passed. So it could be, like an aborted child. It could be a child that was not grieved, a miscarriage, but it could also be an ancestor that passed in the war that was never given a proper place in the lineage. And the third constellations that we can do as well, they're called systemic constellations. And in those situations, we are actually looking at organizations as a whole, because organizations also represent family in a way as well. So sometimes we'll bring in a representative to represent an organization, for example, and then look at the different parts that are unfolding within that aspect. So we would bring in the heart of the organization, and then what the block is, and then what the vision is, and get a sense of what is in the space. And then together we would just bring everything back into wholeness based on what is unfolding in the space.
Beautiful. Yeah, I had an opportunity we did just a short session, right?
A short session.
Yeah, just like a short session to kind of show me what was going on. And it was really beautiful. And Stephanie was very intuitive and tapped into that. My mom had actually had 2 miscarriages. I had never shared those details with her, and she went into that, and we had an opportunity for me to kind of, in a sense, connect with those souls. And we worked a lot on my relationship with my parents and some of the things that they're going through. And it's really beautiful just like having that space to be able to connect. Like when she was describing like the head movements and all the other things, it's like when she creates sacred space, and whenever we create sacred space, everything has meaning. Everything always has meaning. But when you're in ceremony like that, you become hyper attuned to any little symbols, and it begins to open up subconscious like process. So I had an increased capacity to really feel into some things that I knew were present on some level, but go deeper into them. So it allowed that process to begin to like unfurl a little bit more. And then after that, it's like more of a recognition that process is safe and available. So the subconscious is like, yes, it's time to kind of let this go or bring this more to the surface, because it's ready to be seen, it's ready to be healed. And then after that, an increased capacity to be able to work with that process. And all that work that I do, I know and recognize that it helps out. And even if I'm just doing the work on my own, I know it helps my parents. But further than that, I do, and I'm fortunate to have a good relationship with my parents. And then we continue to work on process together. So it's really beautiful to do that. So thank you for that beautiful session.
Thank you for receiving.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to share at this point?
I would say that sometimes in the group session, even though you may not be the main client that is receiving the constellation, you're witnessing the work, for example. The issues that are brought forward are so human that anyone that does attend and witness a constellation receives a lot of insight within their own family. And what happens sometimes, for example, is if we have a client who is having, challenges with abundance, for example, it's usually related to the relationship with the mother. We call this the mother wound. So if we're not able to take our mother into our hearts, then we're not able to take life and anything that it entails into our hearts. That's because the mother is the giver of life. at a soul level. So if someone is unable to honor their mother for life, right, then anything that comes with that, so abundance, joy, is going to be very hard to receive as well. So I would say that as a witness in a constellation, as you watch the dynamics play out with another person's life, it brings an incredible sense of peace in the soul to see that others are also struggling with their relationship with their mothers. And so that in and of itself often creates a lot of space for the person to then open up to the possibility of additional healing. So I found that's been really beautiful. And I've recently attended what we call a womb healing. It's called a womb surround healing, where very similar to a constellation, we recreated the experience in the womb with a group of 10 people. And just like you said,
you're all like in a big tent, nice and warm, water in there.
Everyone is representing, you know, and as you get onto the call, you may start feeling different things, and that's the morphic field. It's the morphic field knows that we have an intention to go back to look at the womb experience. So people, you know, in that group that I attended were feeling all kinds of things: nausea, impatience, anxiousness, this need to deliver. And sometimes you can feel like the doctor was feeling like a 10-year-old boy trying to please their mother. And so, you know, womb surround, which is very similar to family constellations, things are that much more slow. And it's preconception work. It's at the spark of creation. That's the spot that we would go back into. So it's like quantum healing. And that was like really profound, the way that that unfolded. And the intention for that person was they felt that they were taking on a lot more that they needed to in terms of responsibility for others. And that was her intention. And when we went back into the womb space, we found certain things that had led this person to grow up feeling like they needed to take responsibility for more.
When you say constellations, that's a really good word for that, I feel, because it's like I'm picturing both constellations in the sky and like a spider web. Because it's like one piece, as soon as you ruffle it, it's connected to all other things in the web.
Correct.
And it's like our relationship with our mother is a relationship with money, and it's a relationship we're having with our partner, and it's a relationship with ourselves. The constellation is so big like that. And the birth and everything that came and everything that was in that moment is a constellation for your entire life.
Correct.
So it's like everything is always so interweaved.
Right.
And that's really beautiful.
Right. And then you can see how people in your life are actually fractals of your healing as well, that you can help on the path with you and bring with you and elevate, you know, each other through that journey. So it's really magical and beautiful to witness.
Yeah. The other piece that I thought was cool, like when you're in a healing, when you mentioned it in a constellation, you might not be the person who's the center. Like at the end of a breath ceremony or anything that I'm guiding where we have a share circle, we always offer that everyone shares, and that you don't always need to share if you don't want to, of course, but you can share whatever's coming on your heart, you know, whatever feels like it needs to be said, because sometimes we're not speaking for ourselves at that time.
Right.
And sometimes we speak something and somebody else needs to hear it in the field. So it's kind of like we're all, you know, we're all aligned to be there, and there's no coincidence in that.
Exactly.
And that's the truth of ceremony. That's where we feel and experience it the most, because it's usually the most synchronous and magical. But a whole life is ceremony, and every person that you've ever met has some level of connection with you, or perfect level of connection with you. I think it was once said, I don't want to misquote the Buddha out there, but something of a Buddhist teaching perhaps, that like all the people that we have in our life, we've had multiple lives with by now in our time, because that's just how the karmic cycling will work.
Right.
Because these are the people that we've had something in the past with that we're dealing with now. So like the people in your life are so connected to you for not just one life. The people who are really close to you, all of them, you've probably been multiple lives with, and you're sorting stuff out
Exactly, yeah. And you know, the beauty is we've actually done constellations on couples.
Oh, yeah.
And if there's something that comes up, it's in the room, but they don't know what it is, we would often do a past life constellation and see what actually happened. And that's also really powerful, that you can kind of like go into this modality and get some of the answers that you can intuitively feel, but you can't put your finger on. And then go back to that, time and heal it. So, for example, I have a friend who has a partner who there's some kind of weird energy between them, and they couldn't figure it out. Why? Because in this lifetime, nothing is wrong, but they did a constellation and they saw that he actually killed her in a past life. And now they found each other again to repair that, to atone what happened in the past. So we healed that, and now, they're thriving. So that's like a beautiful story that I would want to share with regards to like how this modality can go so many places.
And what powerful healing. And I guess in the span of things, maybe they're into that kind of thing.
Killing each other lifetime after lifetime.
This one we're going to marry, this one we're going to kill each other.
Well, I think it goes to like the victim perpetrator energies as well, right? Like
Sure.
That is something that is part of the collective world consciousness that we live in as well. So it is present. So I do think it does need to be acknowledged that every victim has a perpetrator and vice versa. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about in terms of soul contracts, right? Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm going to jump into past lives. So I'm going to offer a few things. I'll get your perspective on them.
Okay.
So these are all narratives, I suppose. I guess everything's a narrative to some degree. But we have genes, like a whole DNA strands in every cell of our body. And then that carries a genetic lineage of all of our past lives. And if 23andMe is to be true, I have all white ancestry as far back as their tests go. So I'm just like, just white, European and white. So that's like one version of like past lives. So I have these past lives in me genetically. But then, if you read enough in the spiritual world and read people who have had awareness of their past lives, they'll often describe past lives in different continents or even different planets. So that's like a whole different line of past lives. That's not the genetics.
Correct.
So it's kind of like we have two lines there. And then I'll offer another perspective and give no answers. That we also have like, it's less than a past life, as in I'm an individual having a life. It's just a resonance in a past life. And that's why multiple people can have a similar past life. You've probably met like 15 people on the side of the street who claim they're Jesus. And maybe they were Jesus in a past life. And maybe it's not so much that this is an individual, because are we actually an individual at the level of our true nature? So are these our past lives? Or is it more of just a resonance based on where we're vibrating at a certain point in time? For example, Matthias de Stefano, who claims to remember all of his past lives, put it something like this, and that's where I got the idea from, and I might be saying it a little bit wrong, so I'm not completely in the source material, but he kind of claims it as like he remembers all of his past lives, but only a number of them are particularly relevant for his current life and the mission that he's on. So those are the ones he remembers more so. And I kind of think of it like, in my life, I don't remember my whole life, my whole childhood, everything. But I do remember the details that are most relevant for what I'm doing right now in this life. So kind of going back, maybe it's like that for all of us, that it's not so much that we have past lives. We have potential to be all lives, because at the highest level of our true nature, once again, we're not anything, we're everyone. So
Correct.
All past lives are our lives, and all future lives are our lives. So I don't know if there's really a question in there, but what are your thoughts and takes on past lives, and maybe a commentary on some of the words that I've spoken?
Yeah, I think this particular point, we're not going to have a clear answer. So I will offer some reflection.
Sure.
So I agree with you with regards to certain past lives that do come back for you to remember in this life. And I think the deeper that you go into your own meditation and your own process, the more things will start to resonate. The more certain scriptures will stick out to you and wave at you from the bookshelf more than others. So I think this is like a multi-layered, multifaceted question, because I remember that at one point in my journey, I remember getting ready for a trip to the States, and I remember going to the library and trying to find Buddhist books because I was determined to swallow all the Buddhist knowledge out there. But none of the books resonated with me. But when I landed in San Francisco, I sought out a Zen center, and all of the scriptures there were Buddhist. So I needed to go there to obtain that in my body somatically, that information to remember. So I think the remembrance it depends on where you are in your journey and what you want to be doing with it and what's relevant at the time. And in terms of reincarnation and past lives, I think there are, like you said, there are multiple past lives that you can have. But from what I've seen in my journey is I've seen that there's the ancestry, like the ancestral lineage that you come from in the body, in the flesh and bone, that you're still transmuting every day as you're illuminating your own, self-inquiry, and you're seeking different things. And there's also a soul lineage of where does your soul come from? And sometimes there are imprints of the soul family in the field as well that we do access. And then I also believe in different planets out there, ancient civilizations like Lemuria and Atlantis and Sirius. So I do think those are still out there and open for us to tap in. And I think it's really up to the individual how far they actually want to go. How far do you want to, dedicate yourself to a practice to remember, right? And to what end is it going to serve? So I think those are things to contemplate. Is it helpful?
That's beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate that. How deep have you gone in those realms?
I've gone pretty deep. I've gone to Lemuria, so I think
What do you mean by gone there?
I did a few mushroom ceremonies where I saw my future daughter appear in a shell as a pearl.
Okay.
And it happened a number of times where I kept seeing the pearl appearing. And I'm thankful and lucky enough that in my circle of friends, I do have other, people that are consciously seeking this knowledge. So when I shared that experience with them, they told me you should look into Lemuria and Atlantis. And I ended up going on Gaia to check that out. And it turned out the presenter that was presenting the information on Lemuria, he was the husband of a friend of mine that I learned Constellations with.
Wow.
So nothing is by luck. Nothing is by chance. I think it's always woven by spirit. So from there, I did some research, and I was born in Mauritius, and Mauritius is one of the areas that it is anticipated that Lemuria was under.
Where's Mauritius?
So it's in the Indian Ocean by Africa. It's very close to Madagascar.
That's where you were born in this lifetime?
In this lifetime.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
And so for a while, I've been, the anthem is Motherland, O Motherland of Mine. And currently I'm really deep into the Vedic scriptures, so the Bhagavad Gita. And actually India is called the motherland as well. So there's another link there.
So is Russia.
Right.
Others, yeah.
Right. So it's just so beautiful that everything is just so, it's just so interconnected. And yeah, I think the deeper that you let yourself dream and believe in magic, the deeper that spirit will show you what is really possible. So there were times where I've been in meditation and I had a unicorn come up to me and nuzzle its horn in my chest. And when I came out of it, I shared that with the class, and I thought, oh, they're going to think I'm crazy. But my teacher said unicorns usually appear for soul healing. It
This
means
is
that
when
you're
you're
ready.
older, right? It's not when you're young.
No, it was
Is that a class?
that I did like a class.
Like
I was
when you were like in high school or like later.
That was maybe 3 years ago, so
Okay.
after high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Cool.
pretty deep, pretty far out there. Yeah.
Beautiful. And what was that class?
It was a class, intuitive awakening through your senses
Cool.
in Toronto.
So you mentioned the Vedas.
Yes.
And I know you're a bhakti, what would you call it? Student, practitioner?
Bhakti student, always a student.
Always a
student of life.
Student master.
Student of life.
Can you tell me a little bit about your bhakti path?
Bhakti, yes. So in 2019, I went through what I would call an existential crisis. And everything in my life just flipped upside down. And I just felt like the rug was pulled from under me. I had lost my family all in one night. So it was pretty traumatic for my being. And I felt that no one really understood me. I had friends that were witnessing my journey, but they weren't able to hold it. And the alternative was to drink. And I felt like every time I would drink, my emotions would send me into a spiral. So I was seeking something that would be a bit more deep and grounded. So I turned to yoga. So I first did an asana practice, yoga teacher training. And I found myself stumbling upon the Hare Krishna temple in Toronto. And when I walked into that building, I just felt my ego drop. What I was wearing didn't matter. And they were really seeing me as a soul and not as flesh and blood and what color is your hair? What are you wearing? What is your job, right? So in that space, I sat down with a group and they were chanting mantras. And I could feel my whole entire heart soften. I started crying. There was no reason. I was just felt like I was touched by grace. And from there, I pursued it. So I learned the different mantras. I found a community, a bhakti community that was into devotional work. And then from there, I signed up for a 5-day retreat in Omega. It was called Ecstatic Chant, where we would wake up at 7 a.m, do qigong, and then we would chant all night long, different mantras, and they were prayers to the world. They were both in Sanskrit and in English. And I was just hooked because I could feel my whole energy field start to shift. And I just found a refuge in that prayer. So when I moved to Vancouver, I found a new group a new kirtan group. And now I'm doing a 40-day devotion challenge, and I'm learning the Hanuman Chalisa, which is a 40 verse scripture dedicated to the demigod of devotion. And so it's been a really beautiful journey. And
How far in are you?
I'm on day 5 currently.
But did you do it before then? Because you were doing a little bit of this when I talked to you a while ago, right?
I tried studying it, and it was very challenging to memorize it because I don't speak Sanskrit, right? And so putting the words together and trying to memorize everything is quite challenging. But right now I'm sitting every day, no matter what is happening in my life, and just reading and singing along with the lyrics on the paper. And I'm also reading the Bhagavad Gita at the moment. And like when you talk about past life, right? I just feel like there's such a pull to Sanskrit, to the languaging, and to the Hanuman Chalisa. I can just feel like my whole body just say thank you, God, for this chance to be here and to be able to be in devotion and prayer and have this refuge. So
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, bhakti's okay. I've done maybe like 15 or 20 kirtans. And I've had beautiful experiences with all of them, but I guess I just don't hear that call in the same way. It reminds me of like being in church and like singing songs. It has that like not staleness to it, because every time I've had a really beautiful experience of something that I don't get from my other practices. And like, what does that look like for me? Often when we're doing the chanting and the mantra, like my energy sensitivity is greatly enhanced in a different way than in my other practices. And I get shifts, openings, awakenings. I can move energy different, and I'll often, depending on the context of the circle, go into some asanas or go into some dance or something and create a whole aura of energy around me that maintains and lasts after. And yet when someone asks me, I'm like, I don't really want to go. But if I do go, I really enjoy it. So, that could be something that I have with my devotion, my devotional practice. Maybe it's like a resistance there, or just don't like singing as well. I do like singing.
That's multi-layered.
It's a constellation.
It is constellation.
On this stuff.
It's like, how's your inner child doing? Are you afraid of being hurt? What happened? Who didn't hear you when you were a kid?
Exactly.
It's very... Yes.
Well, it's not singing. It is a lot the mantras I'm less called to, rather than Icaros, so the Shipibo ayahuasca tradition, and as well as the indigenous tradition of their Sundance and the sweat songs. So that is a higher resonance for me at this time, but it is always shifting because my life has many different, it seems like, distinct phases of going through different practices in their kind of, like I'll become hyper, I guess obsessed kind of sounds derogatory, but I will become quite obsessed with one, and then it'll last for some time, then I'll seem to, feel the call to move on. Yeah. I, in a note of that, like when I grew up, I loved Japanese anime so much. And particularly this one was called Naruto, and I actually have it tattooed on me because it helped lift me up through a time of my depression. And the main character in that is a ninja. He's a ninja who had a demon fox encapsulated or pulled into him, and it was sealed into him because it was ravaging the city, and everyone hated him for it because they think like it might come out, and this demon fox inside of him would also like enrage him. And then he learned over time to work with that demon inside of him, to work with its power, and became one of the most powerful shinobi, the ninjas. Wow. And that was a metaphor for my depression when I watched it when I was young, and many other things that was going on for me. But the whole show is about ninjutsu, which is like ninja powers. And they have the chakras and they have energy centers and they're moving chi, and it's all about practicing. And it was only later that I actually found qigong and all these things, and I was like, I have all this like foundational like fantasy idealism and everything from my childhood. So when I started practicing qigong, I'm like a ninja.
Yeah.
And so there was like a little bit of like fanboy innocent child being like, oh yeah, I get to practice and do all that stuff. So it was really beautiful to come in and evolve that. And it's like, a piece of my soul was calling out at a very young age, being like, there's a recognition here.
It's really beautiful.
And many of the actual like bad guys, the bosses and other things, had traditional Japanese and Hindu names, like Asura and things like that. So it had all the mythology like speckled in there. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think of it that way. It's whatever is the way in. Mm-hmm. Whatever, that quote with Rumi, there's like a painting, and it's like this person with like trying to like break free from whatever constraint they were in, and there's someone with like a hammer trying to get them out, and it's like one single, I guess, knock of the hammer in the heart space, and like everything will explode, and wherever like the light will come in. So I think, our soul calls out to different people and different experiences, different movies, mm-hmm. to evolve, to find that refuge. So whatever leads the way in, I say, is medicine. Whatever your medicine looks like is all there is, and it's all God, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So in your intuitive healing, what other aspects do you bring in besides the family constellations and the stuff that we've covered? How do you integrate? Do you do bhakti with any of your, would you call them clients, or what other pieces do you have in there?
I think the bhakti, the work of devotion is really something personal to me, and it really strengthens me as a human, and it really helps me be, that pillar of light onto myself first. I think like first and foremost, it's personal practice. And I think it really helps me walk alongside with people as I'm in devotion, as I'm practicing. Things obviously come up for me, and the more that I can do that and sit with it through devotion, devotional work, breath work, and other practices, the more that I can sit with others in their moments of, let's call it crisis, evolution, and so I think like that. On the bhakti note, I would leave that one here. And in terms of the different modalities, it really depends on who I'm with at the moment. So sometimes through conversation, things start to shift for someone as we are, I'm asking questions and things are being illuminated. Things that are in the subconscious are being brought to the surface. The energy starts to move from there, and sometimes the healing starts to happen by just a conversation. And then depending on what else is going on, I sometimes track the soul blueprint. So what's going on in the soul, with soul, and are there any past soul imprints that are still here? So for example, with a lot of other intuitive guides that I work with, sometimes there's a past memory from a time in Lemuria, for example, where they were ejected from Lemuria, or there was a black magician that got to them, and sometimes it's still in their field. So then I will pick up on that and we will unbox it. I like to call it unboxing what happened in the past life. So sometimes that happens. And there's also what we call parts work that I also work with. So sometimes in conversations, I can see that the person I'm in conversation with, their voice changes, the way that they think is regressing. So then what we would do in that particular situation is we would quantum travel to that particular moment in time where they potentially are stuck with this trigger, do some healing there, and then move them back into the adult. So there's another way of illuminating theirs through parts work and through traveling back in the past and bringing resonance and warmth to a part of the person there. And then I like to also offer, like that's kind of like mystical sure. in the past. Occurrences that happen that we're bringing healing to, but there also I find needs to be some integration. So often I will offer, different asanas, different breathwork practices. I will also refer out to some of my clients, here are other modalities that can support you in this process. Mm-hmm. And so then I would refer them out to, other facilitators as well. But personally, I also do energy healing as well. And lately, a new ability that has come to me is I work a lot with angels, Archangel Metatron, and I sometimes see a lot of codes that come through, and they often show me like the lines in the body or where the person needs to be like moved a certain way for the realigning of their chakras to take place. So sometimes that also happens. So I would say it's very intuitively guided and kind of everywhere, and yet weaves together back beautifully. So It really depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very much the same way. I find it's so influenced by what's coming up for that individual. And then also I find I do go through like personal phases of practice where I'll focus on, because I do too many practices to do them all at once. So I'll cycle through ones and focus on them. And then whatever I'm practicing usually is the relevant tool, often synchronously for what they need in a very beautiful way. But yeah, it's like when an individual comes, and I like to, just like this podcast, have no script or anything, because it's like, that's what I think I want. And maybe I'm getting an intuitive hit that is in alignment, But I really like to leave it open when I lead ceremony, when I do one-on-ones, to just be like, okay, what am I seeing coming up, and how can I best work with that energy? Mm-hmm. And like when I'm guiding sessions, like for the most part, I do offer breath work, but in ceremonies and other things, it's like it could be dance, it could be this, it could be that. We could, scrap the whole breath work and end up just like focusing on one person if that really feels like that's what's being intuitively guided. And I think that's like the highest level. Beautiful. For when I'm really tuned in. And right. I feel like any comedian, any artist, like I've heard Frank Zappa used to do that with guitar solos. He's like, I never scripted it because it's like me and Mother Nature going at it at once.
Yes.
Same thing with a lot of good comedians. It's like when they build their routine, they just stand up there and they just talk.
Yes.
And then it comes out over time. And I feel like that's like the level that I like to play at. Mm-hmm. And it's just like no plan. When I lead a yoga class, no plan. It's just like show up and then actually tune in and be present, because then it's as much of a mystery to me as it is to them, and then we're both in it as like observers in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so resonant with me too. And it's showing up as a channel, like it's offering up your whole being, your whole body, your words, limbs to spirit, and asking spirit to guide what needs to happen in this moment. Mm-hmm. Does someone need to scream? Should we all scream together? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really magical when we can see that we are just a human on this ball of earth. We are very thankful to be here.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're just on this ball of earth, really, and there's a greater force, a greater spirit that is leading us out there. And the Bhagavad Gita will tell you that, part of the devotional work is to not be attached to the fruits of your actions. So it's just like a humbleness to realize that, we are holding these spaces, but it's not us. Mm-hmm. This is not us. We may think it's us, but it's actually guided by a force that is, bigger than us, right? And I think when we surrender to that, that's when true grace can happen. When you can tune into the pulse of the energy field and you can align yourself with the rhythm of that pulsing of life and what is being asked from you. Which I think if you had a script, it'd be like, no, I'm not pulsing right. I should pulse differently to that. So it's beautiful.
That kind of brings us to like inductions. So when I first learned some healing modalities, we didn't do too much of it. I wasn't taught, at least. There was some invocation, but I didn't feel it as effective as the one that I learned in Qigong. And in Qigong, we go through a whole induction, which is like, we're going to breathe into the whole body. We're going to connect our energy. We're going to do a bunch of like intentions and things that really align us, body, emotion, and mind. And then also surrendered to then tap into the field so that we're like fully there and present. So we're not in our heads. Mm-hmm. We're not coming from our ego. And I think it's quite necessary to come to that transition point. And then the end result of the Qigong is to put you in a trance or the higher centers of your body, the 6th and 7th chakra, etc. So I feel like when I wasn't doing that in guiding sessions, a lot of it was coming from me. And that can entangle my energy in there. It's just a less effective and efficient process. And when it's fully surrendered and we're able to actually let it go, it's orchestrated at a much higher dimension. So I feel like if individuals listening are an intuitive healer or even massage, like it's a great thing to do, to have an induction process where you do surrender yourself to that process. And I do feel it has dramatically changed the work that I do over the last bit.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very common, a lot of ceremony and other things, of course, but it's great to do in our individual work and even for our day, because we could live at that level, right?
Yes.
It's like, it doesn't matter if you're a healer or not, having a meditation where it's like, okay, this is my sacred process of life, and I'm going to surrender into it. And we want something very comprehensive, and that's what's really beautiful. And I feel like I've done good work to study many traditions because I'm looking for the best ones. It's like, I want the best methods, the best techniques. And after training with 50 teachers in yoga, etc., you learn what works best for you as an individual and what the most effective ones are over time as well. Because I do see a lot of people who do practice, and it's like, if they want to go further, it's like there are more effective ways. And it's like, we can always be like, well, we all go at our own pace, and that's true. And it's like, let's go faster.
Depends on where you want to go.
Of course. Well, I just like comprehensive and effective. Like, it kind of sounds like I want to just get things done more in alignment with, like, say yoga, for example. I'll give an example. The yoga that's typically taught in studio is asana based, and it's fallen far from the asana that was taught in the 8 limbs as a comprehensive system. So if individuals want to practice yoga and achieve union, the actual union experience of yoga, there are effective means to get there, which are not just the asana practice. It's taught as a complete system. So I don't mean get there faster as in, like our very Western do more kind of thing. Yes. I mean, work with the system in its efficiency, in its effectiveness, how it was meant to be built, and in that light.
Right.
Does that make more sense?
Right. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Yes. I think as you grow and evolve as well, like as a human, you're faced with, like, your soul will call in different experiences in your life that will, let's say, like, bring you to your knees, for example, and show you what really matters to you, I think, and really show you the impermanence of things, right? And so I think it's an invitation to maybe, like, sit down and see, like, what am I striving for? Like, what makes a good day? What makes a good day in my books, right? And I think I do a lot of contemplation on death. It's like, if today was my last day, what did I do today? And before it used to be like, I've done a lot of things today, like, we're good to go. And it's recently turned into, did I offer my day as a prayer today? Did I give thanks today? Did I give a thought to all the people that I love today? Like, was it a prayer? Was my day a prayer? So I think as we are, evolving, I think we all have different, I guess, phases in our lives where sometimes we're incubating and doing a lot of, like, work and inner work on ourselves. And then sometimes you can just be in the peace that you've been cultivating. And then maybe it looks different, right? They say, like, healing is not linear, right? It's like windy, Squamish roads. driving up Squamish, winding roads sometimes. That's what your healing can look like, right? So I think, just maybe having some grace and acceptance for, maybe I'm meant to be here right now and do this part of the journey to this depth, and then there's more levity in the next stage. Or sometimes it's also like, well, I'm going down and I'm still going down, and where's the bottom of this pit, and I've reached it, and who's here with me, and how can we go back up together? Or maybe we want to stay here in the dark a bit longer to harvest the pearls of wisdom that do exist in the underworld as well. So I think it really depends on the person. Yeah,
so much of the true spiritual or healing journey or evolutionary tale, whatever you want to label it as, is not like the Instagram. It's kind of like when you're doing really well, you're selling out circles and that's going really high, and you put all your happiness on the show, and then we can get like a false impression of what it is to be spiritually successful in quotes, and what that looks like, because we're always plastered with those images, or we're seeing our teachers and they're always giving talks, but we're always seeing them from their place when they're teaching. We're not seeing the wholeness of their life and that they go through things. Like I have many teachers, and one of them is a curandero from the ayahuasca tradition. And it's like, there's no end to this. You never get to a point and you're done. And I've heard that in many other traditions, but it's so true. You'll never get to a point, so we just continue to do the work, and humility and a humbleness develops, especially with ayahuasca, because there's no walking that path without being humbled. It's like the willingness to be humbled to do that path.
Exactly. And I also think there is a need to normalize quote-unquote ugly emotions like rage and sadness and grief. I think there should be more like circles around, like, screaming. Let's just have a screaming circle, because that could be medicine for people, right? Maybe breathing softly today is not what they need. Maybe they actually need to be on the floor and having like a tantrum, and that would be medicine, right? So I think that also has, you know, like a place, the quote unquote like negative emotions that we attribute as humans that we have aversion to, you know.
And another dimension on that, though it can be therapeutic to have those primal screams, some people get lost in their story or in that emotion. Correct. And then they're just enacting and embellishing on that. So there's a great Correct. Discernment of like, yes, we could go into that, and it might or might not be therapeutic depending on a very individual case at
Correct.
An individual time.
That's right. Yes. Balance is key.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no right or wrong in doing these kind of traditions. It's like a higher level of listening and discernment of when to do things.
Right.
They say in the Shipibo ayahuasca tradition, everything's medicine. And my teacher has many examples of things you wouldn't think are medicine that he was prescribed by his Shipibo teacher. Mm-hmm. I'll say one of them is that he was in the jungle. I believe he was in the jungle at least. But they lit a bunch of tires on fire. And he had to go with a towel over his head and breathe the smoke in. Ooh. So to the listener, that sounds like completely ridiculous. And I wouldn't suggest it. Don't do that. But in a certain prescriptive manner for whatever he was dealing with, his healer, through their deep listening and mastery of the medicine, that was what he needed at that time. And there's a number of other stories he has about different substances and other things you wouldn't usually take that he has taken, and that was what he needed.
Wow. Yeah, so, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think kind of like bring it back to constellation work for a moment is the field, like the morphic field, when you are calling in a constellation, the people that will be attending the constellation often start to channel / feel certain things and have certain thoughts in their head leading up to the constellation. So a very specific example is last year in May, I had put together a mother wound workshop that had 23 people in it. And prior to, you know, us meeting, various people were feeling sick and were having rageful moments, kind of like out of nowhere. And in constellation work, we invite that. We invite all the emotions, you know. Even if you are feeling like really nauseous, show up for the constellation, because it could be that you're holding certain aspects of, you know, the client's issue there as well. So oftentimes when we start a constellation, people on the floor, some like people want to leave, you know, some people are really angry. Mm-hmm. And then we also have, you know, obviously like joyous people and like relatively chill people in the room as well. But we get like the whole orchestra of all of the human emotions in the space. And then we navigate to try to find resonance and a place of peace at the end of the session. So I wanted to also add this in here too, from the acceptance piece and all of the human experience.
Yeah. Anytime we make a big decision, it's like we call that in. We call in that process. We open that up. And generally, especially in spiritual process, but really anything, in marriage, it's like you call in the challenges as soon as you set the stage for it.
Correct.
Same with a fast. You're like, I'm not going to eat for 4 days. And then all of a sudden, all the temptations, if you're doing it in the external world or the outside world, the worldly world, not just in a cave, that you're going to have all those temptations come, most likely.
Right. Go
into celibacy and you're going to have temptations everywhere.
Right.
It's just the way that works.
You're just being met by the opposing force of your intention.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which is teaching something very foundational about how the universe works and how we can attract things.
Right.
And call them in. And the beautiful thing, like in some of the spiritual processes that I've gone through, it's never been really about mastering it. So one of the examples is in the ayahuasca tradition we work with master plants, and I'm on one for 6 months when I work with this spirit of the master plant and I drink it. And they say that the energy, the vibration of the plants is so high because they're basically directly drinking in the sun's light. So they hold a stage that is so beyond what a human can actually do. So they know you're going to fail. It's like we're setting everyone up for failure. Every dieta, there's no winning it. There's no passing the test. That's just what it is. And that's going to show you where where you fall short. You're going to fail. You're going to screw up what you eat or whatever it is, your thoughts.
Right.
Because who can just keep their mind completely in one direction for that period of time?
Right.
If we could do that, we probably wouldn't be on this planet. We could just be beaming from one planet to another. Right. We'd have such mastery. So there's like a beauty in that container of being able to make mistakes. And I say there's a beauty in being in the container, but it's not like there's not consequences, because in the ayahuasca tradition, if you really mess up your dieta, some people die. And it's been known that the plants disorientate them and they actually kill them.
Wow.
So it's not that it's just a safe space for you to make mistakes, because that's life, right?
Right.
If you do make mistakes in life and they're real big mistakes, you'll die.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that kind of safe space, but it is a safe space in that when you die, you do come back.
Mm-hmm.
So
you reincarnate in the next life and with a new family with similar patterns.
That's the narrative,
too.
at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that came up that I wanted to talk to you about was the I Ching, or the work that you do with the gene keys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you want to explain like a brief thing on the gene keys and then what you're doing with it?
Sure. Yes. So the gene keys was introduced to me last year after a mushroom ceremony. I went to a spiritual store and this book fell onto me. That's how I was introduced to the gene keys.
Wow.
And essentially the gene keys are basically 64 archetypes of the human experience that you could have. And each gene key has a shadow frequency, the shadow state, and there is a wisdom frequency, which is called the siddhi. So all of us have a certain map, and the gene keys are based on the I Ching, the astrology, and human design combined, all of them. And so through that, it creates a holographic profile, and each of us have a different one based on, where we were born and what time, and so on and so forth. And so the gene keys are really like a map to your journey, and there are different ways that you can access the gene keys depending on what path you want to go into. So the first path is called the activation sequence, and they are 4 main gene keys that focus on what holds you together as a human right now in this evolution. And then there is the Venus sequence, which will then take you through your emotional body and your relationships and your emotional wounding and how they would show up in your romantic relationships as well. So that one is a spicy one. And then there is the Pearl sequence, which is talking about prosperity, and it's how you are basically structured in your body to be able to, access prosperity in this life. And it doesn't necessarily mean an enormous amount of money. It could mean a thriving community that's around you, thriving health, and, so on and so forth. So with regards to the gene keys, it's very illuminating the way that it works. So for a long time, I think for over 20 years of my life, I was not able to forgive. Something would happen and I would just hold on to it, and I would go for runs, I would meditate, I would breathe, I would do yoga, and I still wasn't able to forgive. And I magically stumbled upon a track on SoundCloud on forgiveness. And at the time, I just had listened to it, and it was actually Richard Rudd who was speaking in that track. And Richard Rudd is the person who founded the Gene Keys, and he channeled them after days and days in seclusion. He just was shown these codes, essentially. And when I listened to that gene key, is called gene key 4. So the gene key is forgiveness, the shadow state is intolerance, and then the siddhi, which is the wisdom state, is understanding. So basically, if you work with the shadow state of intolerance, you would then look in all areas of your life. Where am I intolerant? Can I sit in silence with myself without feeling the need to distract myself because I can't even tolerate myself? So when I found that gene key, it totally just blew me open completely. And it really shifted a lot of things for me energetically. And the gene keys are also, you know, a system that you can enter into, and it's contemplation. There's not much that you need to do. You just contemplate it, and it will start to shift the way that you think, your DNA. You'll start to see certain patterns that will start to come through and emerge. And the way that I'm working with it at the moment is each week there is a particular gene key that gets illuminated by the moon and just where we are in the planets at the moment. So I'm studying them every week and just starting my day with that, just in contemplation, just listening to the gene key and what it has to offer. And the gene key this week actually talks about the serpent path. So it's been really interesting. And
Big black snake
path. Big black snake path this week. So it's interesting that came up earlier when we were setting up. But I would say one of the most profound ways right now that I'm working with the gene keys is through constellation work. I am actually bringing in the gene keys into the space as a resource. So, and, you know, like just working with archetypes, you know, like I also work with magician and the Empress and different types of tarot archetypes, but specifically right now with the gene keys, I found that when I bring gene key 4 into the space, which is forgiveness, you can feel the entire energy of the room shift. And there's also a really profound gene key, which is gene key 22, which speaks about grace. It's one of the deepest gene keys that I've, you know, come across. And I will usually bring that into the space where, like, similar to you, like I don't have a script when I do a constellation. So it's essentially whatever comes up. And there are times where we've spent enough time in a space where there's someone screaming and there's, you know, terror happening in the space, because when we open up, you know, a constellation, we actually quantum leap into that time. So the reps in the room, like the representatives in the room, are actually feeling the terror at the time, right? And so sometimes I will bring in, you know, gene key 4, forgiveness, or gene key 22, grace, to bring some softness into the room and to try to just bring the softness into the room, not to try to do anything, but just for that to be here. And it's been really helpful, I find. And often when I speak to people, I can see like, whoa, okay, like that's like this gene key, or you're feeling like abandonment. Okay, that's gene key 55. We might want to like look at that one, because gene key 55 is like the gene key of evolution and talks about how cosmically we all remember being one, but we're not. But we all remember being one, but that we're not one right now in our bodies because of various journeys, right? And so that comes up a lot, and I will often like refer that to people that I talk to. If they are, you know, wanting that information, I will usually kind of point them towards the gene keys.
Cool. Yeah, it's like anything we've spoken about. It's like, if it's for you, it'll really call out to you.
Correct.
So anyone can go on and create that free profile that's available if you have like your birth date and hour.
Yes.
Do you need that?
Location.
You need the hour, right?
You need the hour.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it can create that, and like if it's got a resonance for you at that time. And sometimes these things aren't ready for us at the time, and it might be months from now, and you'll remember it again and come back to it. I go back and forth on it. I haven't done, I'd say, like a deep dive.
That's when I message you, like, can you send me your gene keys chart? I want to check something.
Right, and I'll recheck it again. I don't personally use too many systems. I'll go through and work with a bunch of them, and then I'm very practice based, so it's just breathing and moving a lot of the time and connecting with things I don't have to read. But I definitely use them, and I remember one of the biggest takeaways from using the gene keys was, I don't remember what my number profile, whatever it was, but it was really clear about that my path is not like the trodden path, and I can't get there with my mind. It has to be intuitive decisions. Beautiful. Which will really keep me in alignment. And that's a really clear indicator, because there are times in my life when I'm not making intuitive decisions and my life is very left brain logical. It's like I'm going through motions, and it's like, okay, there's a stagnancy here, and I need to get back into my body, connect with my practices, so that I can reach that higher level of sensitivity to make see the opportunities that Spirit's trying to show me, and make those intuitive leaps, which they describe as like, if you feel like you're making a decision and it's like you're wavering, or like you have like some hesitation, it's like, it's a good place to be, because you have to be like on your edge, a little bit scared.
Right.
So that's like a good check-in indicator of if I'm in my alignment.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great system. There's a lot of systems coming out, and I feel like we're going to have a big deluge of even more systems from people, tapping more into their gifts and offering these things. So yeah, resonance on these things is so important, because it is like a spiritual flood out there sometimes. And the more we're having like these spiritual traditions be integrated into cultures which weren't like this before. You used to not be able to do 50 different spiritual practices within a 10 kilometer district, but that's Vancouver. Or Los Angeles, or Sedona, whatever it might be. So I think it's cool, and we can do a lot of like spiritual shopping and spiritual moving around. And then we can also get lost in that muck. And then we need to develop our discernment as to like what our path is and how we can move forward.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And one thing I wanted to also reflect back is, I remember a few weeks ago calling you. I was in something, and I was like really hard on myself, because I was like, I'm so spiritual and I have all these practices, like it should be good now. I should be okay. Remember I called you about that? And then I remember you said to me, well, no, this is the work. Like, you are doing the spiritual work right now, crying and being nauseous and like wanting to like have like a tantrum. Like, that is also the spiritual work too, right? So I agree with you. I think sometimes we can get really lost in, there's so many practices out there that we can sometimes bypass into these different practices. But I think it's, it's a balance. You kind of go up for spiritual recharging, reboosting, nourishment, and then you go back in, and you go back into your relationships and show up when things are hard, have the difficult conversation, So I think, the interweaving of like the practices of spirituality and living human life is quite intricate, and there's a lot out there, I think, that people can get lost into. So it's about discernment.
Yeah, I want to highlight that point again, because it's so beautiful, is that, it doesn't matter how many practices you have, no matter how far along you are on the path, you're going to run into something that will be beyond you, and you'll need help from others. And that's so important. Like, I live on my own, and like, sure, most of the time I have a regulated nervous system and I'm deep in my practices, but when I have a big process, I'm blind to it. I can't do it on my own because I'm in it. I'm stuck in it. So I need somebody. I need help. I need community. I need others. And I can't continue to maintain alignment without those people, without others in my life. And that's something will always be true. Because it's just the nature of, how we work as a collective. And I can't do truly, big, deep process and healing without others. It's just not the set space for that.
Because that is part of the healing.
That's part of the healing, like, is to surrender that I can do it all on my own. Exactly.
And it's like, what if being witness is actually what you need at that moment? Like, on the floor screaming your trauma out, is the medicine for you is to watch someone else, hold that space for you, and just pure presence, right? So it's really beautiful. Yeah,
I've had that, like, think of an example at a ceremony. Something was coming up for me, and I was like, I had all my spiritual tools there. I did this asana, like I knew where the energy was. I could breathe into it, and like it wasn't moving. It's like, just ask for help. I was like, no, I can do this. This tool, that tool. Go get some water, take some fresh air. Just ask for help. No. And then I just asked for help, and then as soon as they came by, I just like left. Like, they didn't even say anything. They're like, you just need to ask for help. That was it. So that's how specific spiritual process is, and that's why Like I can think examples in breath. In breath work, you'll have something come up and you'll move through that. And there may be many things that you do to move that energy. Maybe a breath hold, maybe you sped the breath up, maybe you surrendered, maybe you cried. But the tool that you use and the repertoire of tools that you build will never be the one that you need to do the next one.
Right.
You'll always need to go beyond what you've done before, be guided or something.
Right.
Or if you do use a tool, it's not going to be in the way that you do it. So if you try to just do it of your own volition, be like, oh, I've seen this before, I can do this.
Right.
That's not the nature of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be truly new process coming up.
Right.
So that's so important that it's just like this continual learning and surrendering and raising of our consciousness in that beautiful way.
Right. Now, I'm also seeing that, you know, there's like a new way of existing as well as intuitive guides too, is instead of there being like one teacher and like one leader, right, where it's like hierarchy, I find that now it's more like circular. It's like you're the teacher today, but then I'm the teacher tomorrow. And that's really beautiful. And even if you're not an intuitive guide, you know, like I've learned to practice, like my teacher would say, train yourself to see the great soul that is behind someone's eyes and see their greatness. And in the Gene Keys, you would say you're holding that person that you're, you know, in presence with to their Siddhic state. You're basically seeing their enlightened state, right? And so I think that is also something to contemplate as we move along and co-weave together, like in the world, and as we're doing our work, right? And I think everything can be devotion, everything can be a prayer, right? So a text can be a prayer, a text can be a ceremony as well. So I think there's just new ways of being that are emerging, and it's beautiful to see that it's in companionship with others that is unfolding.
Yeah, we're all one another's teachers. And it's like there's no perspective in which you can be enlightened without everybody else simultaneously being enlightened. Because to have the idea that just I'm enlightened and other people aren't isn't the true perception.
Right.
So it's very important to be able to be like humble to all of our teachers.
Right.
And I've had some, like there was this guy, this is like 4 years ago, and I went to a Tim Hortons, and the guy that served me was like the happiest guy that I've ever met. And I was doing a bunch of spiritual work with many teachers, and that guy's like energy stuck with me. I was like, I think that guy's the Buddha. And I was just like, all the other spiritual teachers like paled in comparison to the energy this man was holding. And I was just like so humbled by him. I was just like, I was so confused at the time, and it just stuck with me. I was like, yeah, it was just like, get out of the spiritual hierarchy head.
Right.
And there is some good reason for spiritual hierarchies and all hierarchies.
Right.
Especially in certain traditions and, you know, medicine traditions, etc. There's good damn reason for it.
Right.
But as well, we also need to play this game at many different dimensions and levels.
Right.
And that's part of the consciousness that's coming through. It's like, be your multi-dimensional self. And there's a certain humbling place, and there's a certain hierarchy and heightened place that we can see the world through.
Right. Yes.
Beautiful. So we've had a beautiful chat about many different things, and I know we can go for a lot longer, but we've shared a lot of good wisdom here. Is there any final pieces that you want to share of wisdom or anything else to conclude here? And we can do all like the show notes stuff with websites. So just anything else you want to conclude with?
I think I just want to offer this thought or this question of how can my life be a prayer today?
Yeah,
Thank you.
such an important one. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
you
you
for our friendship and the healing ceremonies and all the good that is to come. Thank you all for watching, for listening. Thank you for sharing your breath and your energy with me. Aya Om.